So just a reminder, if those of you who are not familiar with client success, we are a customer success management software. We help our customers manage their customers from new to renew. So that entire post-initial sales lifecycle, everything from how you're orchestrating your customers through onboarding all the way through the renewal process. So if you're on the market looking for a software to help you manage your customer base, please check us out. You can head over to our website, request a demo. If you're interested in learning more, I'm happy to talk to you about it. You can go find me on LinkedIn. Dave Blake, our CEO, would happily chat with you as well. Of course, if you've got a solution in place, it's not meeting your needs, you want to explore something else, we are here for that conversation as well. So again, happy to have a conversation with you. If you're in the market, would love to work with you. Now we've got a few other slides for this week, just quickly. We do have an end of summer sale going on. So if you are able to complete a demo, so if you are interested, you're shopping around for a customer success solution, you complete a demo by August 31st. So by end of next week, you'll qualify for a 20% discount. So head over to that URL that I've got on my screen. It's info.clientsuccess.com/20-off. And then request a demo through there. That way it'll guarantee if you decide to move forward with client success, you like what you see, you think it'd be a useful solution for you and your team, you'll get 20% off. So take advantage of that. We also have our annual event coming up, CS100 Summit. If you have not heard of this event, I definitely recommend you go check out our website, ask a friend who's been there before. I got to tell you, I've been in customer success for well over a decade now. I attended so many conferences in my lifetime in customer success. It wasn't until last year I attended CS100 as an employee here at Client Success. And I got to tell you, it was exactly what everyone had hyped it up to be. It is an immersive leadership experience. I can tell you I've had not only the best memories and experiences, but learned some of the most interesting things about customer success and the future of, learned a lot about leadership. It is a great, great leadership event. So if you are a leader in customer success, if you know a leader in customer success, please go check out CS100 Summit. If you are interested in a promo code, I am happy to give you my discount code. So I will extend my discount to you. If you are interested, just hit me up on LinkedIn and I will send that promo code over to you. Lastly, we've got our State of Customer Success survey. I know I'm asking a lot of you all today. I'm going to go drop this link into the chat for you, but we are collecting all this information about customer success, which we then share back with the community. We do this every year. We present it back in a webinar to make sure that we are all aware of what the latest trends are in customer success. We cover everything from salary, compensation to trends, team staffing, and everything in between. So if you can spare 15 minutes of your time, I'd greatly appreciate it. The community benefits from it. Head over to the link that I just dropped in the chat and complete the State of Customer Success survey. Now, what you're all actually here for is our customer success thought leader summer webinar series. I know I say this every week, but wow, could I have possibly managed to fit any more words in the title of this webinar series? Probably not, but it encompasses exactly what it is. This is the ability to host some of the best and brightest in customer success throughout the entire summer. And so hopefully for those of you who have attended some of these others, you've taken away so much information and learnings throughout the summer. And I am thrilled to host my friend today, Dan Ennis, who's going to be talking about scaling customer success. So Dan, hi, welcome.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
We are so excited to have you today. And I know that you're going to cover so much exciting stuff. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen because everyone is tired of hearing from me, Dan. So I'm stopping there. You can go ahead and pull up your deck and let's get you introduced to the community today.
Amazing. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining today. My name is Dan Ennis, and I'll give a little bit more of an intro on myself in a minute here. But I'm really excited to be with everybody today, and in particular, really talking about this topic of specifically how to get started with scaled customer success. We'll talk a little bit about some of the theory behind it, but really the goal today is for today to be practical for you to be able to walk away with tips that you can apply to your CS org right now as you go about building a scaled customer success program. So really, as we go about talking about this topic, because there are so many different ways to approach everything that we could be talking about related to scaled customer success, wanted to walk this through specifically a few questions that I have received a lot over the last couple of years as I've been building out scaled customer success. So we'll start with some definitions of what even is scaled customer success. Why does this matter? What is this topic? and how does this apply to your organization? So that way we can make sure that we're being consistent around what scaled customer success is. And then on top of that, we'll go from there into why now is the time that you might be thinking about scaled customer success and how to actually approach that. Then from there, we'll talk about how can you actually get started? What are the things that you can begin doing right now to get started on building out a scaled customer success motion? And then from there, we'll wrap up with how do you iterate? How do you improve? Maybe you're someone who's already started building a scaled CS motion and you're just not really sure where to go from here or how to continue improving on that particular topic for you. So on that note, wanted to start with a little introduction of who am I if you haven't met me before. So my name is Dan Ennis. I'm currently the Scale team manager, so the team manager of the Scale customer success team at Monday.com. So I've been with Monday for a little over 3 years now and been building Scale for the last 3 years there, this whole scaled motion that we've been a part of building. And I've been in CS for over 10 years now and over 5 years leading teams. I've built a scale motion at 2 different companies, second time now at Monday.com, and before that at another company called Think HR. So really, this is something that I've been doing since well before Scale CS was cool and before it became the hot topic. It's something I'm really passionate about because I know that efficiency is something that all CS orgs and businesses truly care about and how they can make sure they grow and increase their impact to their customers. So that's a little bit briefly about who I am. Definitely happy to answer any other questions about that as we keep going. Feel free to ask those in the chat because I'm really excited for this topic. So that's where we're going. And like I said, wanted to start with a quick definition. What is scaled customer success? Because if you've been at all paying attention to what's going on in the broader conversations on LinkedIn or in your conversations with coworkers or in the industry, you'll see that scale is the it thing this year. It's being talked about nonstop, whether that's from leading CS coaches like Rachel Provin, who go in and talk about how to use data to make decisions at scale as a CS leader, or seasoned customer success professionals like Jeremy Donaldson, walking through how scaled customer success is top of mind for everybody and is something that's really trendy for people to think about right now. Or moving forward with someone like Jan Young, who I know kicked off this webinar series, talking about digital customer success and scaled customer success and some of the different tools that you can use to build this out because it's top of mind for everybody. Or even another leading voice within this customer success community, a name I'm sure many of you are familiar with, someone like Jay Nathan, who is talking about how we can't continue to scale on the one-to-one basis that we're doing right now. And so if you've been at all paying attention to the conversation, you'll notice that scale customer success is something that's top of mind and is so hot right now on so many businesses' minds as they're approaching it. But the problem is everybody has a million different definitions for what that even means. And so we're oftentimes talking past each other. So we want to begin with starting with what even is scaled customer success. We're going to be approaching this topic. We need to begin with a common starting point of understanding what are we talking about when we talk about scaled customer success? How does scaled customer success relate to digital customer success? Are these the same thing? How interchangeable are they? What does scaled customer success mean for my organization? How do we approach that? There's a million questions around that. So on that note, we wanted to start with, like I said, beginning with a simple definition. To that end, there's a lot of different ways people talk about it, and I could quote a million different people for how we've talked about it. But when we're talking about scaled customer success today, we're referring to the idea that scaled CS is the motion of building out your people, processes, and technology to enable your CS teams to deliver more impact for a larger scale of customers. So when we're talking scaled CS, the scale in scaled customer success truly is the scale of your customers that you're supporting and the scale of the impact that your teams are delivering. The idea is we know that we can't approach this topic and continuing to drive impact with exact one-to-one headcount growth the way we maybe historically have. So scaled customer success is the broad motion of the actions that you're taking to enable your teams to increase their impact and increase the scale of customers without necessarily increasing one-to-one the headcount on there. This includes things like digital customer success, which we'll talk about a little bit. This includes things like growing in efficiency and automations. but it is really truly inclusive of all of those things, because scaled customer success, at the end of the day, like all of customer success, is ultimately about your customers, which is why it's about increasing the scale of customers and the scale of impact with those customers. That's what we want to do. That's what we want to focus on. So you can see with a definition that broad how this can include a wide variety of things. This can include things like automating your processes, removing a lot of the manual touches that your CS teams have to take within your CRM or within your client success platform or whatever you're using. So you automate processes so that CSMs aren't having to spend as much manual time doing all of the individual things. So therefore they can focus their energies elsewhere. This looks like focusing on one-to-many motions, things where you're bringing multiple customers together so that the same amount of time from an individual is now impacting a larger number of customers rather than just one-to-one human intervention. This includes building out full-on digital customer success programs and the asynchronous components that come with that. You can build those out. This is not just for a segment. This is something that you can apply across your segments, building out these digital components where you're leveraging digital tools to enable your customers to be supported in the way that makes sense for them. It includes the asynchronous customer enablement so that you're not just having one-to-one connections with your customers, because again, if we're keeping the customers at the center, most of your customers don't want to speak to a human for every single need that they have. Nobody looks forward to picking up the phone and speaking to their CSM, no matter how amazing the CSM is. They'd rather solve it for themselves. So you're increasing the scale that way. It includes templatizing as much as possible so that people don't need to reinvent the wheel every time they go to send a new email or to begin a new play, creating playbooks, so much more. You can see that this is a really broad topic, but it's because you have so many different levers that you can pull to begin building out a scaled customer success program. And when we talk about this, ultimately, the components of scaled customer success are your people, your processes, your technology. Doesn't sound groundbreaking, but it's because a lot of times we overlook the obvious in a case like this. Your people, your processes, and your technologies, these are the levers that you can pull as you are looking to build out a scaled customer success motion and increase the impact and increase the scale of customers that you're working with. And so as you think about how your customers connect with your people, your processes, your technology, you want to make this done in such a way that enables them to have as much success as possible in the way that's going to be most beneficial for them. So when we talk your people, this is your support team, your customer success team, your marketing team. What people do you have that you can work with to increase your impact? Your processes, think through your broad categories. This is onboarding. This is customer education. This is customer marketing. This is your various CS processes, your voice of customer process. What different processes do you have that you can make modifications to that will enable your team to, with the same amount of time, increase their impact or increase the number of customers that are impacted? And then lastly, of course, your technology. This is your knowledge base, your email marketing tools, your CRM, your customer success platform, your data analytics, your in-app notifications. All of these things that you use either that the customer interacts with directly or that support your teams in interacting with customers. These are the levers that you have that you can work with when you're working with your customers and building out a scaled customer success motion. So again, coming back to that definition there, scaled customer success is all about increasing the impact and increasing the scale of customers by working on your processes, people, and technology. So if that's what scaled customer success is, why now? Why is this the topic that people are thinking about right now? So these are based on some real conversations that I've had with people over the last couple of years, and especially this year. We'll start with the elephant in the room, the big one that is on top of everybody's mind that I hear across the board. When we look at the macroeconomic climate, and therefore the way people know that they can't add headcount and they can't just throw costly headcount at a problem, they have to figure out what can we do in this climate to continue to support a growing number of customers or to increase the impact without just focusing on increasing headcount. And again, you might need to increase headcount at some point, but if that's the only lever you're pulling, you're missing the opportunity to increase the impact and efficiency of your teams, especially in the midst of this macroeconomic climate, which is forcing a lot of us to have to get consistent and have to look a little more intentionally at how we're spending our time with our teams and how we're supporting our customers. But another reason to build out a scaled customer success motion is to right size based on what your customers actually need. Again, we want to keep customers at the center. And a lot of times our more traditional high engagement motions really focus all around what you as a company are doing and aren't so focused on what a customer actually needs in terms of engagement and support to be able to have success with your product. So we're focusing on a high human engagement model when transparently your customers would actually rather have asynchronous resources and just have a strategic conversation with someone when they really truly need it. Which leads into the third reason that I hear people talking about is your CSMs are spending all their time on low value actions that are not truly contributing value for your organization or your customers, but they're the things that need to be done. Think of all the manual CRM updates. Think of all the email outreach they have to do. Think of all of the times they have to create a follow-up email or all of the times they have to create a deck template. All those things are important and needed, but they're not the most high value for CSMs to be doing. So as companies are looking at what can they do right now so that they can free their team's time up for those most high value actions. And then on top of that, they want to be able to multiply the successful motions that you already have without a one-to-one increase in your input. So you want to identify what is it that's working. Maybe you've identified a few things already. And so you're thinking right now, how can I multiply what we already know works without multiplying the person, right? So how can I do that? How can I focus on that to build out a motion that's even more scalable? And then, of course, this brings it back full circle, similar to the macroeconomic climate. But as companies are now shifting, and if you look at, again, any of the conversation from people that are talking about what's most important for organizations now, you'll realize that it's efficiency for the long term, not just growth at all costs. So as you focus on efficiency for the long term, the idea would be you're looking at now is the time, even if it's because of external forces, maybe initially, that need to build out a scaled customer success motion or to focus on scaling out your customer success org. But what you're doing is you're building in the efficiency that you need for the long term that enables sustainable growth. And this is something from just a real world conversation when I was talking with someone in my network who was going to build it out this year. We had a conversation and I got their permission to use their examples because I thought it is typical of a lot of companies that are out there. They were talking about how they wanted to build a scaled customer success motion now in 2023 because of a few reasons. Number one, they had customers that weren't hitting their internal adoption targets. They knew what they wanted customers to do, but they had a large number of customers that they thought could be totally self-serve and achieve those adoption targets that were leading indicators towards retention, and they just weren't hitting it. And so they needed to figure out, how can we do this? Because we can't afford to just throw one-to-one CSMs at these accounts. But that's also because they were a product-led growth company with a long tail of accounts that have high growth opportunity, and they wanted to accelerate those. But again, the economics, if they're being transparent, didn't work out to just throw one-to-one CSM headcount at it. So how do they, in a product-led growth model with a long tail of customers, how do they accelerate that growth? How do they have a customer success motion that provides value to these customers? And then lastly, again, as they were reckoning with the fact that things weren't quite as totally self-service as they wanted it to be, they were getting feedback from their sales team, from their implementation team about customers who were coming on board, purchasing the product, and then being implemented, but then still needed ongoing customer success support after the fact to achieve success, to achieve the level of growth they wanted to have. So on that front, they began thinking, we need to do something. about these customers. We need to do something with our CSMs, and we can't just throw bodies at the problem. What are we going to do? And that's what led them thinking about it. And I think their story is not unique. And this conversation was towards the end of last year, before even some of the macroeconomic challenges. This was just proactively thinking about it. So regardless of the reason, now is a time that this is top of mind for so many people. And on that note, as a pulse check, I'd love if you could throw it in the chat. I want to make this interactive and engaging. Why are you thinking about scaled CS right now? Like Christy mentioned, make sure you've got your response there set to everyone if you can. And that way you can just throw it in the chat, because you're all here for a reason. And I'd love to know, and if you could just throw it in the chat there, what it is that's causing you to think about building a scaled CS motion right now. So I'll give everybody a quick minute here to throw some of your answers there in the chat. And not so stealthily take a sip of water. Amazing. I'm seeing responses about hiring freezes. I'm seeing responses about creating efficiencies, about reducing churn in those lower tier customer accounts, quickly growing the customer base, repeatable processes, lots of commonalities I'm seeing here that resonate with a lot of what I've heard with other people. So I would encourage you, using this opportunity, connect with others if you can after the call that are coming from a similar why as you. But regardless of the why, this brings all of us to a point of wanting to know, what do I even do now? How do I actually go about getting started? When I look at all of the different topics, Dan, that definition you gave is really helpful, but it's also really broad. What can I actually do to go about getting started building out a scaled customer success motion right now? And if I saw the last comment there in the chat, and if anybody takes away something from today that's going to help them win the love of their CFO, that would be a great takeaway from today. If that can be what you walk away with, that's fantastic. But talking about the topic of how do you get started, we want to make sure that this actually is actionable for you. So I want to focus on beginning with a few common starting points, and we'll elaborate on each of these. But some common starting points that I've seen, and again, this isn't overly groundbreaking, because I think when we're trying to get started, we overlook the important, simple things that we can do that are high impact out the gate. So some of these are initial approaches that you'll see here that we'll elaborate on. Some might be light bulb moments for you. Some might be things you've already heard of before, but that's okay, because we have a habit of overlooking the simple because we think that there's got to be a complex silver bullet out there, when the simple, repeatable motions build compound interest over time with the impact with our customers. So really, if some of this sounds familiar to you, double down on the efforts that you might see here for some of this. So starting with this, number one, a very common starting point, if you don't have a customer journey already defined, reverse engineer what that customer journey is. And here's what I mean by that. We a lot of times hear that when you're building out a process and you're trying to think through building a scaled motion or any other customer success motion, we understand the importance of building out a customer journey. But within that, we try to reinvent the wheel and we make this overly complicated thing. Leverage what's already working. Look at your customers that are already successful and reverse engineer from there. What was their journey that they took towards success? What were the milestones that they achieved along their way that helped them be successful? Similarly, when you look at your customers that have churned and your customers that have downgraded, those that have gone dark, you'll be able to identify patterns when you're looking at your customers in aggregate to be able to understand and reverse engineer what a successful customer journey looks like, because that's what's going to help you understand what are the inputs that you can have that will help move your customers through the journey so that they're achieving success, because you want to understand what that is. Again, lean into what is already working, what you already see with maybe your traditional high touch motions, to understand what does that look like. And once you've done that, you can then take a step back to the next step here. And then you can begin to automate what works. We'll talk a little bit more around automation, because again, when people think of scaled customer success, a lot of times the first thing that comes to mind is we want to automate everything. You don't want to automate everything. You only want to automate what's actually working to reduce the manual input from your teams. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute here, but really, even incremental, small amounts of automation pay dividends in the long run for your team. You don't need to scorch the earth all at once and automate absolutely all of your processes. Start with the small things that you can automate. And then from there, focus on one-to-many motions. So when you've identified what are the milestones that customers achieve, and when you identify what it is that successful customers need to do, think through what are the ways that you can help foster those motions and those steps from your customers in a one-to-many way. Some of those examples would include things like building out office hours, building out asynchronous email communications, building out customer communities. All of these are different ways that you are having a one-to-many motion so that you are helping them understand at a larger scale how you can have those inputs and those impacts with your customer base so that they are achieving those milestones within your customer journey and you're not just throwing one-to-one human intervention at them. And then when you're starting to build this out, you can either take a bottom-up approach, starting with your lowest ARR customers and working your way up, or a top-down approach where you start with identifying the gaps at your highest ARR customers and then working down to your other segments. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. I'll share a little bit more detail around bottom-up versus top-down approaches there. And then lastly, because we want to have a snowball effect, start with the quick wins. Start with the items that, when you're looking at the quadrant here, really of measuring out the impact of an action that you're taking and an impact of a change versus the effort that's required for that change. Despite our desire to jump straight to the biggest impact things, and we want to move straight to those high effort, high impact things and tackle everything all at once, this really is a marathon and not a sprint. And so to build that snowball effect, you want to start with quick wins. So to do that, you want to identify the things that are going to have a high impact for your customers and your teams in terms of time savings for your team so that they can focus on what really matters with their customers, as well as are going to require the least efforts. And if you're trying to figure out, well, what are those things? Honestly, talk to your teams, get their input. As a leader, we can sometimes put too much pressure on ourselves for figuring this all out on our own. We think, I'm the leader, I've got to map this out, I need to chart the course, I've got to figure this out, my team's looking to me. Well, yes, your team is looking to you to lead. At the same time, your teams are also the ones most intimately familiar with what's sucking up their time. What are they spending the most time and energy on? If you ask your teams in a team meeting, what is it that you think is the biggest waster of your time right now? I guarantee you, you're not going to be lacking for responses. Your team will know. So check with your teams. Do time studies. Identify what are the most common things that we're getting in an email question that we could just create a self-serve resource for. What are the most common things that my team is all creating the exact same thing that we can just templatize? Do we have 1 million customers asking about the exact same use case? So rather than having every CSM do a one-off training, we can just create an office hours for it and have a CSM host it. And now they're spending that same 1 hour that they would have already spent. But now instead of impacting one customer, they're impacting a dozen customers, 50 customers, 100 customers. Fill in the blank. And they're taking this approach because it's, again, low effort, high impact. You want to start with those to get that buy-in and build that snowball effect so that you can then begin tackling the really big challenges and then focus on those high effort, high impact activities that are going to make a big difference when scaling out your customer success motion. But from there, we always want to come back to, again, the topic of automation, which is one of the first things that comes to mind when we think of scaling customer success. And I think that this quote from Bill Gates, though he's talking about software automations and software processes, I think it's infinitely just as true in our business processes. He talks about how the first rule in any technology used in a business automation, when you're using it on an efficient operation, it magnifies the efficiency. But Correlated with that, when you automate an inefficient operation, it magnifies the inefficiency. The challenge, if you jump straight to automation when scaling your customer success practices and trying to build out a scaled customer success motion, you might end up automating something that sucks. Just being transparent, right? I've made that mistake before. I jumped straight to how can we automate our processes without stopping and thinking, is this process one worth automating? Is this one that we should do? So use this as a great inflection point. If you're trying to think through automating, use it as a great inflection point to measure the effectiveness of a process. Because if a process is not effective, it is not worth automating. And that might mean having to face some difficult truths about some of our own processes. That's okay. Improvement for our customers to increase the scale of customers that we're creating an even increased scale of impact for is worth it. So don't just try to automate everything. Identify what's most working in your processes and see what you can identify there. Is there a particular email outreach that can be done to identify customers that are ripe for an upsell? Great, automate that. That's already working. Fill in the blank. What processes work and find those and then automate from there. Now, I wanted to talk about when we're starting building out the process, how there's really two broad ways you can begin building out a scaled customer success process. First is bottom up, and the second is top down. So for bottom up, this is where you would begin with typically your lowest ARR segment, that large pool of customers, that long tail growth customers, those that are just the lowest ACV that are within that. From there, what you'll do is you'll build your processes and a scaled motion to support them entirely. And you're typically creating a segmentation within this where you are creating a service level and a support structure for this lowest engagement segment. I'm avoiding saying lowest touch because I know how much Christy loves hearing the phrase levels of touch for customers. So using this idea of the lowest engagement segment of customers, where you're going to be building the lowest human interaction segment to support this large group of customers. And after you've built out a repeatable motion that truly is helping these customers and that is supporting them at scale to achieve success, to begin building out their successful customer journey, you can take what's working there that you've already proved the value of and apply it to your broader customer base, to all of those no engagement users across all of your segments. Because guess what? At your large scale enterprise customers, the majority of their users don't have direct engagement from a customer success manager. That's feature, not bug. So after you've proven out what works at scale with this low ARR segment of customers with a low engagement model, because you can't just throw one-to-one engagement at it and you're focusing engagements where they matter, you can then apply the learnings there that you've already proved the value and move up your ARR revenue chain and apply those learnings to those higher ARR segments of customers. Similar, this is where the top-down approach would be. You look at your highest ARR segments, you look at your biggest customers, and you identify what are the customer success gaps for their end users at our big customers. What's going on with these customers that are not achieving whatever milestone we want them to achieve because something's not being done for their end users, and we can't just throw CSM headcount to meet with every end user at our large enterprise customers. That's not what their job is. That's not what they're good at. And that's not what our customers even actually want. So you think through and identify what are those gaps that we can do, that we can close. And so you build out and identify repeatable digital, oftentimes, plays that are based around your technology, your processes, your people. And from there, you're able to build out a motion and plays that can then be applied usually as a standalone service level to those lower ARR segments of customers that don't require the same level of engagement as a higher ARR customer with higher complexity. So the idea here when you're doing this is you're trying to keep your customers at the center of your approach and build this out in a way that, again, scales the volume of customers and scales the impact that you're working with. And so you're identifying those gaps, you're closing those gaps at the top level of customers, and then from there, you're working down the ARR chain to create standalone service offerings. And so this allows you to build that out. And so in my current role, my current company, I thought it would be helpful to even start with a little bit of how we approached it. What did that look like for us when we first started? What was our V1, our MVP of a scaled customer success motion when we began building this out, like I said, a couple of years ago since I've been here at Monday.com. So we took a bottom-up approach. We were working with the lower ARR segment because they had less complexity, but they still needed some level of support. We began by building out an initial office hours offering. We knew that we could just get large groups of customers together to learn about a topic, and we knew some of the top topics that our support team got questions about a lot that we could proactively address strategically in a one-to-many office hours setting that I think was really helpful there. So we began with that, but transparently, there wasn't the most strategy to the cadence of the office hours or what exactly the content was, but we got the offering out there and we knew that it would be well attended, and it was. Then we empowered CSMs to create ad hoc one-to-many email campaigns. We encouraged them to identify using our data analytics tools segments of their customers that had common gaps in their adoption and create email campaigns that were sent out ad hoc to their customer base that would help move the needle on increasing adoption at those different levers and with those different customers. But it was all ad hoc. It was being done by each CSM for the portfolio of customers in their name. And so within that, this led to, of course, we were doing this because it was limited human intervention. These accounts had, it was basically a hybrid pooled model in the sense that from the account's perspective, they didn't know that they had a CSM, but the CSM was working with them because they had accounts assigned to them in our CRM so that they could work with these customers that were identified as at risk and trying to intervene and in a limited time capacity, work with these customers, and then therefore improve their adoption, improve all of the leading indicators that rolled up into what we cared most about, which is retention. And then, of course, I think that this last one here was the absolute key. And if you hear one takeaway with this, it's this last bullet. It was that we encouraged our team to experiment freely and measure everything, because it was key to us to understand what is actually working as we're building out this new motion. People were encouraged to experiment, to try new things with their customer base, to try new ways of engaging their customers. But the only asterisk we gave was we have to measure everything, because if something doesn't work, that's fine. It's okay to test something and learn that something new doesn't work. It's not okay to test something new and be uncertain if it worked or not. So we did that so that we could then gather what we needed from a data perspective to be able to do what we're going to wrap up with in a second here, which is iterate, improve, and grow our scaled customer success motion into something even more sophisticated that better served our customers. So all of these are just examples of where you can start and some tactical ways of how you can get started. So with that, wanted to give you a second here for another pulse check. We've covered quite a few different topics. So one of the things I'd encourage you to do is there's something powerful about putting something out there, putting something in writing, thinking about this and not just having an idea in your head. So knowing that your teams aren't likely seeing the Zoom chat on this, so you're safe space. Think through what is one area that you can begin tackling today when you're trying to build out scaled customer success. Think through just putting in a process you can automate, an email you can templatize, a way that you can reduce the number of human interactions that are required to support your customers, because again, your customers don't necessarily want the highest number of engagements anyways. It's about what they need. So I'd encourage you, just take a minute and throw that in the chat here about what's one thing that you can begin working on today. Amazing. I'd encourage you to keep throwing those in the chat as we keep going, as you think about those again, just because there's something powerful to committing to and putting something out there. So this leads us to the last part of our conversation here, which is how do you iterate on your scaled customer success motion? And the question that's in the back of everybody's mind, how do you measure its success? Because a lot of us have come from maybe more traditional, higher engagement customer success motions. And a lot of our typical ways of measuring success aren't necessarily one-to-one going to apply to a scaled customer success motion. So as we think about that, wanted to walk through at a high level a little bit here, how you can begin building out and iterating on your V1, your MVP. How do you improve on it? How do you grow it? How do you measure its success? So begins with relentlessly measuring several things, because in scaled customer success motions, typically you're going to have to rely a lot more on reading the data and understanding than just one-to-one conversations with customers to understand what's most needed for how you can improve. Though we'll get to in a second that there's still a valid and very important place for that. So you want to relentlessly measure things. So first, you want to define what is the North Star metric or metrics that you're aiming to have this team, this motion influence. For a lot of you, it's a variation of retention rate, whether that's the gross retention rate or the net retention rate. Whatever that is your team's North Star metric or metrics. Think through what those are that you're trying to influence, because you can't influence what you're not measuring, and you can't have the right inputs just if you're scattering everything and taking a scattershot approach. So you want to measure, okay, end of the day, what is the outcome we're hoping that this motion is improving? Then from there, all of those North Star metrics have leading indicators that roll up to those North Star metrics. So at the end of the day, if you're measuring retention rate, for example, you can't just use that as the indicator, because that's way too lagging on its own. So then maybe you'll take a step back and realize that there are certain adoption measurements and adoption metrics that are leading indicators that are consistent, that roll up to that North Star metric, that help you understand how can you iterate, how can you influence that North Star metric. Because you might need to use a proxy metric here, it's okay to use proxy metrics in a case like this, as long as you can truly reasonably define why you're using that metric as a leading indicator. So maybe that's the adoption as a leading indicator, adoption of certain features. And then from there, you want to measure the leading indicators to those leading indicators. What are the steps that customers take that lead to those outcomes that lead to your North Star metric? So you want to continually go upstream. You want to measure what are all of these leading indicators to get to the point where you're identifying what the inputs are that your team can take that contribute to those indicators, and then operationalize on those inputs. A key word I want to say here really quick though, make sure when you're measuring your North Star metric, your leading indicators, the leading indicators for your leading indicators, don't let confirmation bias throw you off base with what you see in your data. Make sure to actually see what the data is telling you, and from there, that's when you can take actions that you're operationalizing instead of operationalizing on your assumptions of confirmation bias. I'll give an example on that really quick. Let's say you assume feature X is your stickiest feature. You want to verify that. You go and you look at your churned customers and you realize, yes, see, 90% of our churned customers barely used feature X, and we know that that's our stickiest feature. That confirms it. We're going to put a lot of effort and emphasis into inputs that increase adoption of feature X. You increase feature X's usage, your retention rate doesn't meaningfully improve. What's going on? You didn't take the time to realize when you looked at your more successful customers that they were using that feature to accomplish a very specific business outcome. And it turns out that that business outcome is what you most want to operationalize, not necessarily a feature for a feature's sake. So you don't want to just let confirmation bias color the way you're measuring data. So once you've done all of that, you want to operationalize those different inputs. And from there, you want to, when you're measuring the effectiveness of your inputs, what you can do is leverage marketing methodologies to measure that. And here's what I mean by leveraging marketing methodologies. If you're going to use an email campaign as a one-to-many way to move the needle on increasing adoption of a certain feature that you know, and you send out the email campaign and you realize that there's no meaningful increase of that feature, don't immediately go to say, well, email isn't what worked. Look at what a marketing team would do, put on your marketer's hat and analyze from there. Okay, was this email opened? Because if the email was sent to a large number of customers and was not particularly opened, that doesn't speak anything to the content of the email. That could be the subject line, it could be the audience, it could be a million different things. So put on your marketer's hat there to measure the effectiveness of the input. Okay, this was opened by a lot of people, but nobody clicked on the content that was in there. So maybe the content that we were trying to direct them to in our help center is really helpful, but we didn't have copy that was going to direct them to what we needed them to do. Put on your marketer's hat to identify where can you improve on your inputs. Don't just make assumptions. So think through all those different components when you're trying to iterate and grow your scaled customer success motions. And from there, don't be afraid to revisit your strategy. Remember your ultimate North Star, your customers and the outcome that they are having. Ultimately, yes, this might be being driven by internal business needs, but the goal is increased impact for a larger scale of customers. So you want to make sure that your strategy is actually serving your customers. If you're seeing adoption metrics increase, but your customers are being frustrated by being bombarded by a million emails and are therefore having a negative experience with your product and platform, that's not a good process necessarily, right? So don't just set it and forget it. Continue to come back to your process, iterate on it, and don't just look at the data side of things. Also, proactively seek feedback. Seek feedback internally from your CSMs that are operating on the processes that you've rolled out. Make sure that this really is as time saving for them as it should be in theory, that it is as simple for them as it should be, because nothing's worse than when there's a disconnect between on paper and reality and you're making assumptions because you're just not talking to your team. Check with other teams like your sales team. What's the feedback that they're getting from customers? Because they'll be the first ones to hear from customers as well sometimes if you've got an account management team. Your product team on different ways that you can one-to-many scale out, increasing adoption on what your product team is working on. Just seek that input and feedback internally from your organization, but also seek it externally. Talk to your customers, get their feedback. If you're making a change that impacts a large number of customers, get that input from your customers and get their feedback. And you can use that to get both quantitative and qualitative feedback. Send out a survey to get their feedback on a change that you've rolled out. But here's the kicker. If you're going to send out a survey to get that feedback, make sure you follow up on that. Don't just send this out and then never follow up on it and then look at your responses and say, well, a large number of customers said they liked it, or a large number of customers said they weren't feeling like they were achieving their goals. Follow up with those customers. Use the quantitative data of a survey to identify which customers are worth following up with for that qualitative feedback with customers. They have an opinion. Talk to your customers and their opinion matters. And then lastly, as you revise your strategy and you're trying to move quickly and build out a scaled customer success process and motion, it can be tempting to send out an email internally on your internal Slack channels, your MS Teams channels, let the team know, send out some documentation and communicate to sales and everybody else. And you think you've checked the box, we've revised our strategy, we've done our job. Over communicate. Because if you don't, there's going to be misalignment internally, which leads to, and I think I saw someone reference this in the chat, it leads to misalignment externally. Because if sales doesn't understand what you've made changes wise to your service levels, they're not going to be able to get customers with the right expectation. And then that creates a vicious cycle with your customers. So make sure to over communicate any changes that you make internally. If you think you've done enough communication, do one more. That's always a good rule of thumb if you're trying to think of how to over communicate this. And then to share, I shared a little bit about our V1 and a little bit of how we've evolved over time, just to share that. We've moved from, I just wanted to share a little bit of what our scaled customer success motion looks like now, and then we'll dive into the questions. So from there, we've moved from CS engagements that were ad hoc, just being done, to truly targeted CS engagements based around what customers need. So what we've done is we went through and we looked at all of our customers and our ones that were successful based on a number of different criteria, and we let the data determine how many engagements these customers actually need. And we've right-sized what our engagement model is based on what they wanted and needed. We didn't just make assumptions. We didn't just say, well, what can we do to make our efficiency numbers add up, because that doesn't serve anybody. So we've got an engagement model now that's truly based on the data of what our successful customers needed on average. And then from there, rather than ad hoc emails, we identified people that were doing this really well on the team, for example. And so they've created proactive lifecycle based emails that are now being sent out to move customers through the customer journey. It's a lot more intentional and done at scale instead of ad hoc. And for risk flagging, we've worked closely with our data analytics teams to identify what are the true risk indicators from a data perspective so that we can provide that just-in-time customer success with accounts that are flagged as at risk. From there, we've moved to a really intentional strategic themes for our office hours around what our customers' evolving needs are so that we can make sure that we're modifying those to actually meet what our customers need in a one-to-many format. And then lastly there, we've taken a lot of the things that are most helpful here and we're applying it across segments. It's not just its own segment now, but it's become a strategy that we've been able to implement across the board for others as well. And these are just a few of the ways that that's evolved for us over time. And we could get into another full-on hour session just talking about that. But I wanted to give a little bit of concreteness for what this can look like for a V1 and what it looks like after a couple of years of iterating and working on that to make sure that we're achieving customer goals. So really, that brings me to the end here of what I had in my part of the presentation that I wanted to share. So with that, I will turn it on over to Christy for the questions.
Excellent, Jan. Well, I got to tell you, I took so many notes. This was probably one of my favorite sessions. So thank you so much. Why don't we do this? Why don't you stop sharing? We've got a couple questions. I'm watching the clock. We'll see how many we can get to. All right. So we'll start with this one from Jenny. So when a customer is not following the recommended approach of using live and on-demand training resources, but they want one-to-one training, how do you redirect them to self-serve before agreeing to just schedule personalized training sessions for them? Oh, Dan, I think you're on
I
mute.
know, I realize exactly. I just took my sip of water. Exactly. I'm so proactive on the mute when I do my sips there. Anyhow, great question, Jenny. And I think a lot of it starts with putting yourself in the customer's shoes. So it's all about how you communicate that before taking those steps. Because again, hopefully you heard when I shared my processes here, how we've approached it. It's not about getting rid of those one-to-one interactions, but making sure they're being used when they're most needed. So when you begin by redirecting them, there's a world of difference between, great, hey, here's a help center article, or hey, here's a video you should watch, versus rather than waiting on time to schedule this training with me because our schedules might take a while to line up, here's a video that you can watch on your end that helps the majority of our customers with what you're talking about. If you still have questions after that, follow up from there. So it's really putting yourself in their shoes and positioning these things in a way that is truly value add for them. And I would say, again, it also starts with asking yourself the hard questions of, are these self-serve resources truly beneficial and effective? Because if they're not, no amount of positioning is going to get a customer to go to those instead of to a person.
All right, we've got one more question, and that's probably all we're going to have time for today, guys. All right, so Glenn asked, AI and things like ChatGPT are being thrown around as quick ways to gain scale and efficiency. These are buzzwords to many. How are you thinking about AI specifically as it relates to scaling CS?
Great question. And I think that some of that would come down to one of the best things, if we're talking about that from a, like you said, a buzzword perspective, it's never going to be what's going to fully replace it. It's never going to be what fully replaces your human inputs on those, but using it to do a 0 to 1 with your team, if you're having your team work on copywriting, for example, for emails, getting an initial 0 to 1 from ChatGPT when you put in a prompt of what you're trying to accomplish with a customer, and then having your team modify that. What is it that's needed for your customer base based on what you got from there, or vice versa? If you've got teams that know what needs to go into an email, but they suck at copywriting because they're not marketers, let them put that into ChatGPT and figure out, how do I make this sound better? that's just one example. Think through, using ChatGPT as someone to dialogue off of. If you give it a persona, if you're trying to figure out, you're a company in this industry, you're trying to accomplish X, how would you do that? Hopefully you've got that directly from your customers, because they're a lot better than ChatGPT for that. But if you're not, that's a great way to scale out some of that when you're trying to think of what do you need to build. So I think that those are just some quick initial thoughts, but transparently, like you said, I do think that there's a lot more room for that down the line.
Very good. Well, Dan, thank you so much for joining us this week. Your session was amazing. For those of us who weren't able to join today, don't worry, the recording will be available. We'll get that out and posted as soon as possible. For everyone else, thank you so much again for carving out a little bit of your week to spend with us. We've got one last session in this summer webinar series that's next week. And we're going to be talking about hiring and finding jobs in this market in customer success. So really, I think an important one for a lot of folks in the community. But again, Dan, thank you so much. We were thrilled to host you this week.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a joy to be here. And thanks for all you all are doing for the community.
Wonderful. All right. Thanks, everyone. See you next week.